A life 250 years long. The first thing Elias Venn learned at the end of his life was that 250 years can still feel too short. Not because he had done nothing. He had done more than most nations. He had built companies, buried dynasties, watched oceans rise and cities move, loved women whose grandchildren became old, and outlived enemies so completely that their names sounded fictional. But on his last morning, under a white blanket in a house by the gray sea, he opened his eyes, looked at the sunrise, and whispered already. That was the terrible joke. A man can be given more time than anyone in history and still arrive unprepared. This is the story of Elias Venn, the first man to make a long life look like a victory, and the last man to understand what it cost. Elias was born in 2029 in a city that no longer exists under that name. His father repaired elevators. His mother taught literature to teenagers who pretended not to listen. They lived on the 10th floor of a building that smelled of rain, metal soup, and tired people. Elias was not born brilliant. That was the first lie people told about him later. He was curious, yes. Stubborn, absolutely. But mostly he was hungry. Not hungry for food. Hungry for control. At 12, after watching his father beg a hospital administrator for more time to pay a bill, Elias made his first private promise. No one will ever own my calendar. At 19, he promised himself he would be rich. At 31, he promised himself he would become necessary. And at 46, after selling a biotech company for more money than his father could imagine without laughing, he made the promise that ruined and saved him. I will not die before I understand what life is for. It sounded noble when he said it. Most selfish promises do. The treatment was called Renewal Sequence 9. Nobody called it immortality at first. That word frightened investors and priests. The Bruchers used softer language, cellular repair, genetic stability, neural preservation, all the smooth phrases people use when they want to sell God in medical packaging. Elias invested early, then deeply, then personally. By 68, he had the face of a man who had stopped negotiating with time. The world noticed, of course it did. The world always notices when someone escapes a rule everyone else must obey. Some called him a visionary. Some called him a thief. Others called him the first landlord of death. Elias gave interviews in clean white rooms and said longer lives would make people wiser. Better marriages. Better governments. Deeper art. Fewer wars. He believed half of it. That was his talent. He could lie sincerely. At 72, Elias buried his father. The old man had refused renewal with ordinary dignity. You could have more years, Elias said beside the hospital window. His father smiled. I could also have a bigger coat. Doesn't mean I need one. Elias hated that answer because he could not buy his way around it. His mother died 6 years later. On her last evening, she asked Elias to read to her. His voice broke in the middle. She opened her eyes and said, "You always rush the sad lines. I don't want to make you sad." You don't make sadness by naming it, she said. You make loneliness by avoiding it. He did not understand. Not then. He was still young. He was 81. The first 100 years of Elias Venn's life were later described as an ascent. But Elias knew the truth. He was not climbing. He was outrunning. He outran poverty, weakness, and every room where anyone could tell him no. He built clinics, funded universities, and placed his name on towers, scholarships, and satellites. He married a woman named Mara, who loved him before the world did. Mara had a low voice, a dangerous laugh, and the habit of touching furniture when she entered a room, as if every place deserved to be greeted. For 33 years, she stood beside Elias while his life grew larger. Then one morning, while pouring coffee, she said, "I am leaving next spring." Elias looked up from a legal brief. Leaving for where? A smaller life. He laughed because he thought she was joking. She was not. Mara had taken renewal for him. At first because she loved him. Later because the world made aging beside him feel like a public failure. But she had come to hate the endless postponement of endings. Their friends delayed children, art, apology, courage, joy. Everyone kept saying there would be time. Mara said eternity had made them cheap with the present. You sound like someone who has given up, Ilias told her. No, she said. I sound like someone who has counted the cost. He tried to persuade her. Then charm her. Then frighten her with loneliness. Mara listened to all of it and asked one question. When did you last enjoy a day without planning how to protect it from tomorrow? Ilias had no answer. So he attacked the question. That was easier. She left in the spring. She moved to a coastal town where bread was made by hand and people still died at insulting, beautiful ages. Ilias visited once. Mara met him in old sandals and a blue scarf. She had wrinkles again. They shocked him, not because they made her ugly but because they made her specific. Near midnight, he asked, Are you happy? Not every day, she said. But my days belong to me. He wanted to call that small. Instead, he went back to his long life. Mara died at 94. Ilias did not attend the funeral. There is always something important enough to hide behind. He sent flowers. The flowers arrived late. For the next 40 years, Ilias became impossible to surprise. That is one curse of a very long life. Experience can make you wise. Then useful. Then arrogant in quiet ways. You begin to hear people's sentences before they finish them. You watch young lovers and remember the pattern of their mistakes. You hear a child say, No one has ever felt this before, and you want to laugh. But the child is right. No one has ever felt it in that body on that afternoon with that exact storm behind the ribs. Ilias forgot this. By 120, Ilias had more descendants than he could recognize without assistance. He gave gifts, created trusts, prevented scandals, and remembered names for the length of a room. Then he forgot them. His mind was not failing. His heart had begun to ration attachment. Everyone respected him. Few approached him when they were broken. At 138, he met a boy named Leo. Leo was the son of a kitchen worker at one of Ilias' estates. He was 9 years old, thin, watchful, and permanently unimpressed. Ilias found him in the greenhouse, eating stolen strawberries under a table of experimental citrus trees. Most children would have panicked. Leo only looked up and said, These are too sour. Ilias almost smiled. They cost 3,000 credits per gram to cultivate. Then someone got robbed. What is your name? Leo. Do you know who I am? Yes. And you are not afraid? Leo considered this while chewing. My mother says rich people are only scary when they were bored. Ilias smiled then. It surprised him. He hired a tutor for the boy. Then a better one. Leo was not a genius, and that comforted Ilias. Geniuses often mistook speed for depth. Leo was slower. His answers took time, but they had roots. Years passed. Leo became Ilias' assistant, then his student, then the nearest thing Ilias had to a friend. One night, when Ilias was 150 and Leo was 21, they stood on a balcony above the city. Leo asked, Do you ever get tired of winning? Ilias looked at him. That is a poor person's question. No, Leo said. It is a human one. Ilias should have dismissed him. Instead, he said, Winning prevents other people from deciding what my life means. Leo nodded. And after you win enough? Ilias said nothing. Leo leaned on the railing. I think some people don't want to live longer. They just want to avoid being finished. The words struck Ilias harder than they should have. Because in them he heard his father, his mother, Mara, all the dead speaking through a boy who had stolen strawberries. Ilias sent Leo away the next year. He told everyone Leo needed independence. The truth was simpler. Leo had come too close. The second century changed the world faster than the first. Seas rose. Cities moved. Nations split and returned under new flags. Ilias sat on councils where the same faces appeared decade after decade, smooth and tireless. The long-lived said they were stabilizing civilization. The young said they were clogging it. Both were right. Long life gave people the chance to learn from mistakes. It also gave them more time to defend those mistakes as wisdom. At 186, the renewal collapse began. The earliest patients did not forget. They remembered too much. Old grief returned with taste, whether smell. A stranger's laugh could open a dead wife's kitchen. Machine oil could resurrect a father's hands. Doctors called it temporal saturation. Poets called it the soul becoming overcrowded. Elias preferred the medical term. It sounded fixable. Some treatments helped. None cured. Then the public turned. The long-lived had been envied. Now they were pitied. Then resented. Then feared. People began asking whether survival, extended far enough, became a form of hoarding. Elias went on the feeds and gave the best speech of his career. The old, he said, must become bridges, not walls. The speech went viral for 11 days. Then a woman whose grandmother had died waiting for an affordable renewal dose posted one sentence beneath it. Then move. 2 words, then move. By dawn, Elias understood. The sentence was not political. It was personal. He had adapted, expanded, survived, negotiated, acquired, endured. But he had not moved aside. At 199, Elias retired from every board. The world did not collapse. This offended him. Then relieved him. Then wounded him again. Young people made errors he had warned them about. They also made discoveries he would have prevented because they looked foolish at first. For the first time since childhood, Elias had mornings with no urgent claim on them. He hated them. An empty morning is a mirror. One day, he walked without an appointment. He passed a public school where children were painting a wall with bright, clumsy animals. A little girl had painted a bird with 6 legs. Elias stopped. "That is not anatomically efficient," he said. The girl turned around, brush dripping yellow. "It's not done flying yet." He stood there, defeated by the answer. Something loosened in him. Not healed. Loosened. He began volunteering at the school under a false title. The children called him Mer. They did not care that he had owned orbital stations. They cared that he could not operate the glue printer and that his stories moved too slowly. So Elias learned that attention is not owed. It is earned moment by moment. The young do not need the old to be impressive. They need them to be present. At 208, Elias received a message from Leo. He had not seen him in 57 years. The message contained only an address and a line. "If you have finally run out of speeches, come." Elias went. He found Leo in a mountain settlement built after the droughts and rebuilt after the fires. Leo was 79 now, untreated by renewal, with white hair, raw hands, and a face so deeply lined it seemed written in a language Elias had forgotten. For a while neither spoke. Then Elias said, "I should not have sent you away." "No," Leo said. "You should have asked why I frightened you." Elias breathed in, "Because you saw me." Leo nodded, "Yes." Elias stayed 3 days. On the last morning, Leo said, "I am dying." Elias closed his eyes. "How long?" "Months. Maybe less." "There are treatments." "I know. I can arrange." "I know." The old rhythm rose in Elias. Offer, solve, defeat the ending. But Leo looked at him with the same calm disrespect he had carried since childhood. "Do not turn my death into your emergency." Elias' mouth closed. Leo's voice softened. "I am not asking you to approve. I am asking you to stay." So Elias stayed. He stayed through the weakening, the visitors, the pain, and the embarrassing tenderness of helping a man wash when both remembered him young. On the final night, Leo asked for the story about the stolen strawberries. Elias told it badly at first. Too polished. Too clever. Leo opened one eye. Truthfully. So Elias began again. This time, he described not only the greenhouse and the sour fruit, but how lonely he had been that day without knowing it. Leo listened. At the end he whispered there. That was a life. He died before sunrise. This time, Elias attended the funeral. He did not speak. He carried water. He moved chairs. He washed cups. He held Leo's youngest grandchild when the child became bored and angry with grief. After the burial, someone asked if he wanted a private place to mourn. No, Ilias said, and he remained among them. At 212, Ilias began giving things away. Not donations for reputation. Not strategic philanthropy. Giving away. He transferred patents into public trusts, returned land where contracts had been legal but not just funded clinics without naming rights, and wrote apologies that arrived a century late. Some forgave him, some did not. They were right not to. Repair is not a time machine. It does not erase, it only tells the future that the past is no longer being defended. He visited Mara's grave for the first time 118 years after she was buried. He brought no flowers. Flowers had failed him once. Instead, he brought a loaf of bread from her old town's bakery and sat in the grass. He told her he had mistaken duration for devotion. He told her she had been right about small lives. A day can be small the way a seed is small. Not lesser, concentrated. No answer came, but Ilias no longer demanded answers from the dead. That too was growth. By 230, Ilias was famous in a different way. Not as the man who conquered aging. As the ancient man who had become strangely ordinary. He lived in a modest house by the Grey Sea. He cooked badly. He forgot to answer messages. He taught one class each autumn called mistakes that took me a century to notice. Students expected secrets. Instead, Ilias walked in with a cracked mug and said, "Most of what I know I learned too late. Let us see if you can do better." He taught them that ambition without affection becomes appetite. That youth is not stupidity and age is not wisdom. That legacy is what no longer needs your name in order to continue. Sometimes students asked if he regretted taking renewal. Ilias never answered quickly. Finally, he would say, "I regret what I used it to avoid." Damn. No, Ilias said. Being chained by what I loved. Near the end of his 249th year, renewal finally failed him. Not dramatically. No scandal in front of cameras. His cells simply grew tired of being persuaded. His hands shook. His bones thinned. His voice weakened until every sentence had to be chosen with care. This improved his conversation. People leaned closer. Meaning had room to breathe. Doctors offered experimental interventions. He declined. The first time he did so, he heard his father's voice in his own. A bigger coat. He smiled for an hour after that. His family came in waves. Some came out of love. Some came out of duty. Some came because history was dying in a bed and they wanted to say they had been there. Ilias welcomed them all. He no longer demanded pure motives. One evening, a young woman named Sira sat beside him. She was 17, one of his descendants, though neither was entirely sure how many greats belonged before the word granddaughter. She had been quiet for most of the visit. Then she asked, was it worth it? Everyone in the room became still. It was the question journalists had asked for generations. But from Sarah it did not sound like journalism. It sounded like fear. Ilias looked at her face, bright with the unbearable beginning of adulthood. Ask better, he whispered. She frowned. What? Not worth it. Ask what it cost. Sarah swallowed. What did it cost? Ilias looked around the room. At the portraits. At the living. At the dead. At the sea beyond the glass. It cost me urgency, he said. No one spoke. He continued slowly. When you think there will always be more time, you become careless with the only time that is real. Sarah took his hand. Would you choose it again? Ilias closed his eyes. In the darkness behind them, years gathered. His father beneath hospital light. His mother correcting his reading. Mara in the blue scarf. Leo under the greenhouse table. The six-legged bird. The bread on the grave. The glorious waste. The terrible abundance. Yes, he said at last. But sooner I would learn how to stop running. He slept. In the morning, he woke before dawn and asked to be taken outside. Families argue with death as if logistics can delay it. But Sarah understood. She wrapped him in blankets. Others helped. They carried him to the terrace overlooking the sea. The world was quiet in that blue hour before sunrise. Ilias watched the horizon brighten. For once, he did not think about what would happen next. Not to the clinics, not to the trusts, not to the students, not to his name. He watched light arrive as if it had never done so before. After 250 years, he finally saw morning without trying to own it. Sarah sat beside him. "Are you afraid?" she asked. Ilias considered lying. Old habits die after old men sometimes. Then he said a little. She squeezed his hand. He added, "But I am also curious." That made her cry. He wanted to comfort her, but his strength was almost gone. So he did the only thing left. He stayed, breathing, watching, present. The sun broke over the water. Gold opened across the sea. For one impossible second, every face he had loved seemed to stand within that light. Not as ghosts, not as promises, as proof that nothing had been kept, and nothing had been entirely lost. Ilias Venn, who had lived 250 years, who had owned islands and lost kitchens, who had bought time and misplaced days, smiled with the wonder of a boy seeing the ocean for the first time. His last words were not profound. That disappointed several people in the room. But Sarah loved them all her life. Ilias looked at the sunrise and whispered, "There you are." Then he died. For weeks the world argued about what his life had meant. Some called him a hero. Some called him a warning. But in a small schoolyard, the wall with the six-legged bird was repainted by a new class of children. They did not know who Ilias Venn had been. They only knew the old painting underneath had made people smile. So they painted another impossible creature over it. This one had wings made of doors. And beneath it, because children enjoy rules when they get to invent them, they wrote a sentence their teacher had once heard from an old volunteer who could not use the glue printer. "A long life is not made of many years. It is made of many moments you did not refuse to enter." That is the moral of Ilias Venn's 250 years. Time can give you chances, but it cannot give you courage. It can give you decades, but it cannot teach you tenderness unless you are willing to be interrupted by love. If you spend your life postponing the difficult conversation, the honest apology, the ordinary breakfast, the hand you should have held, then even 250 years will feel too short. But if you learn to enter the day you have been given, if you learn to listen before the funeral, forgive before the silence, rest before the body breaks, and love without demanding that love protect you from loss, then a single morning can be wide enough to contain a lifetime. Maybe that is what Ilias discovered at the end. Not how to live forever, but how to stop treating life as something that begins later. Because later is the most seductive lie time ever tells. Sooner or later, whether after 25 years or 250, every life asks the same question. Were you here? Not just alive, not just busy, not just successful. Here, in the room, at the table, inside the brief and burning hour that was actually yours. And the tragedy of Ilias Venn is that it took him 2.5 centuries to answer. The grace of Ilias Venn is that at last he did.